Run away. Run away. The thought flashed in Rachel's mind, sharp and uninvited, as Lazarus's touch lingered on her skin. The heat between them was undeniable, but so was the instinct to flee. Every fiber of her being screamed for distance, but she pushed it away, focusing instead on the pulse of energy still thrumming beneath her skin. For a moment, looking into his eyes, she felt as if she had known him for an eternity. Her breath caught, her heart racing. And before she could stop herself, she rose on her toes and met his gaze. Their lips brushed in a kiss that started slow, tentative, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, a promise shared in silence. His lips on hers, his arms wrapping around her as if shielding her from the world, felt as natural as breathing. As the world outside faded away, Rachel's fingers tightened on his shirt, pulling him closer. His hand slid to her back, steady and grounding, and she felt her pulse quicken. In that instant, all the questions, the doubts about duty and choice melted away. This wasn't just a kiss. It was a vow without words, a vow that stretched across time and fate. Lazarus was the first to pull back, breathless yet controlled. He rested his forehead against hers, still holding her close. "You're full of surprises," he murmured, his voice low with admiration. Rachel chuckled softly, catching her breath. "Predictable is overrated," she teased, her eyes sparkling with challenge. They stayed like that for a moment, wrapped in the warmth of the silence they shared. Then, with a soft exhale, Rachel broke the spell, stepping back to retrieve her katana. "We should clean up," she said, her usual confidence returning. Lazarus nodded, though his gaze lingered on her, reluctant to let go of the moment. Together, they tidied up the gym, putting away the weapons and turning off the lights. Each movement felt heavy, as if the air between them was still charged with the energy of their encounter. As they stepped outside into the cool morning air, Rachel glanced up at the sky, already planning what came next. "I'll see you at breakfast," she said, her tone light, though her heart was still racing. Lazarus reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll be there." They parted ways, but Rachel's mind was spinning with thoughts of what had just happened. In this modern era, few of their kind still waited for the promise of the bond. In fact, until she had felt its ethereal pull, she would have called anyone who suggested such a thing a liar. Yet here she was, feeling the ancient will of the goddess, tying her to a man she hardly knew. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to shake the lingering sensation of his touch. The heat, the intensity, the way everything around her had blurred as their kiss deepened. A part of her wanted to dismiss it as just a moment, an impulse, a spark of desire that had been long buried and finally ignited. But another, more insistent part of her knew better. That pull wasn't just physical. It was something ancient, something that resonated deep within her soul, making every rational thought seem small and insignificant. Rachel had always been skeptical about the old ways. Her world was filled with technology, social media, constant noise, and a stream of information that never ceased. Magic felt like a myth in a world that had moved on from ancient beliefs. And yet, she couldn't deny what had happened. The bond had stirred inside her like an unseen current, tugging her toward Lazarus, as if they had been connected for centuries. She didn't know how, but it felt undeniable. She walked through the house, her steps slow, deliberate. The walls seemed to close in on her, the echo of her thoughts growing louder with every step. Could she really trust this bond? Was it something real or just a trick of the mind? Rachel had always prided herself on her independence, on the belief that she could stand alone if necessary. The world around her demanded strength and self-sufficiency. It was how she had survived. But now this force was pulling her in, and she wasn't sure if it was something she could fight. Her fingers traced the edges of the doorframe as she paused in front of her room. She had never been one to believe in fairy tales, in destinies written by gods. The idea that something so grand could be true, that there was some cosmic force guiding her path, seemed absurd. But as she stood there, the memory of Lazarus's eyes, dark, filled with something she couldn't name, pressed in on her. Those eyes held more than just the physical intensity of the moment. They had held something deeper, something older, like a door she wasn't ready to open. What if I'm wrong? The thought clung to her, refusing to be silenced. What if this wasn't just a kiss or a fleeting attraction? What if this bond was as ancient as the stories, as powerful as the goddess herself? What if it wasn't just his fate that had brought them together, but hers as well? Her heart thudded in her chest. The bond wasn't something she had chosen. It wasn't something she had asked for. Yet with every passing second, the more she tried to push it away, the stronger it became. There was a gnawing feeling deep inside her, an awareness that her life was no longer entirely her own. It was as though something greater was at work, something that had woven its threads around her long before she had ever met Lazarus, something that, despite her doubts, she couldn't deny. Her mother had always warned her about the dangers of fate. She had grown up hearing stories about the old days, about the pacts, the bonds that held people together. She had always dismissed them as superstition, but now, standing in the quiet of the hallway, Rachel wondered if her mother had been preparing her all along. But to be bound to someone like Lazarus, a man who was still a mystery to her in so many ways, a man who seemed to hold secrets, layers she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? Rachel turned toward the window, staring out at the morning sky, trying to calm the tumult inside her. The sun was slightly above the treetops, distant yet powerful. She thought about the kiss, about the way Lazarus's presence seemed to fill the room with an energy she couldn't explain. In those few seconds, everything had felt simple. There was no past, no future, only the connection between them. But as quickly as it had come, the clarity faded, leaving her with more questions than answers. Was this some trick of the gods, or had she finally been ensnared by something beyond her understanding? The uncertainty weighed on her, but even more than that, the bond itself felt like a force she could not ignore. As she closed her eyes, the pull was there again, subtle yet undeniable. Lazarus's face appeared in her mind's eye, that same intensity in his gaze. She could feel his presence without even being near him, and it terrified her. Their bond settled over her like a blanket. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a presence, an entity, a promise she couldn't break, even if she wanted to. Run away, she thought again. But it wasn't a simple answer, because with every part of her being she knew that she couldn't. Not now. Not with the bond pulling her toward him, urging her to embrace something that could change everything. And so, for a short moment, Rachel let herself wonder. What if she was meant to walk this path, to trust in this bond, despite everything she had ever believed? What if fate, or the goddess, or whatever force was behind it all was leading her exactly where she was supposed to go? The thought settled in her chest, and it was no longer about fighting or fleeing. It was about letting it happen. The idea echoed in her mind, a whisper she wasn't sure she could ignore anymore. It felt as if she were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, with no clear way back. Every instinct she had screamed at her to fight, to preserve the control she had always fought so hard to maintain. But the more she resisted, the more she could feel the pull, like gravity, relentless and inevitable. Could she fight against something that felt so right? That moment with Lazarus, the kiss, the spark, it wasn't just physical. There was something ancient, something destined woven into it, and no matter how many walls she built around herself, it was there. It was real. Her mind spun in circles, torn between the life she had built, independent and free, and this strange, inevitable connection. Could she surrender? What would it mean for her, for him, for the future they were walking toward? What if it was a trap? The question made her pause. She had never believed in fate or destiny. It was a luxury for the hopeless, a crutch for the weak. But now, here she was, standing on the precipice, questioning everything she thought she knew. She wasn't someone who fell into line, who followed someone else's lead, yet the tug of the bond was like a siren song she couldn't ignore. What would it feel like to trust in it? The thought terrified her. She'd spent her entire life building walls around her heart, making sure no one could get close enough to hurt her. But this was different. The bond was bigger than both of them. It was bigger than her. She exhaled shakily, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. Flight seemed the safest option. It was what she'd always done. Run from things she couldn't control. Protect herself from the dangers she couldn't predict. But this time running didn't feel like a choice. Not anymore. And yet there was something in her, something deep inside her core, that wanted to stay. not out of obligation or duty, but out of choice. The choice to trust, to see where the bond might take her, even if she couldn't see the destination. As the minutes ticked by, her mind began to quiet, the noise of her internal struggle fading to a dull hum. She stood there, her thoughts slowing, when a sudden realization jolted through her. She was starving. The rush of hunger was sharp and insistent, cutting through her thoughts like a knife. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that it almost made her laugh. Of all the things to hit her in the middle of a moment like this, food. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she last ate, and the gnawing emptiness in her stomach reminded her just how long she'd been lost in her head. Rachel shook her head, allowing herself a quiet laugh. She had just been contemplating a life-changing bond, and her stomach was the one to remind her of her basic needs. But that, too, seemed somehow fitting. Life wasn't just about fate, duty, and destiny. Sometimes it was about the little things, like filling the void inside her, both physically and emotionally. She smiled to herself, realizing that maybe, for tonight, she could let go of the weight of it all, if only for a moment. The bond could wait. Lazarus could wait. A plate of food, though, now that was something she could control.